a changing. The people, we have been changing. Even in an ordinary year, we go through so much. There are so many opportunities for transformation. And certainly in the last 21 months, is it now, of pandemic life, we have had such opportunities for change, whether we wanted it or not. And I want to talk about that in the context of our Unitarian Universalist third principle, acceptance and spiritual growth at the heart of that principle. Now, I remember when my children were particularly little and everything was hard. I remember being exhausted all the time. If there are any parents here, solidarity. But I remember thinking, because I was in seminary at the time when my children were little, if only I had the compassion for the people of my household, the patience for the people of my household that I felt for the whole rest of the world. And so I laughed when I came across this article from one of my friends, someone I really admire in our movement, the Reverend Meg Barnhouse, the minister of First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin, the church I grew up in. Meg wasn't the minister then, but she is now. And she has a piece in the UU World magazine from 2009 that says, "Who says Unitarian Universalism's principles are easy?" It's a misnomer, to be sure. She says, "For those who think it's easy, I have a suggestion. Let's stick something onto the end of every principle that will stop people from smiling and nodding comfortably as they read. So instead of those old fortune cookie ends where you would add in the bathtub or between the sheets," she says, "how about we attach at the end of the principles to beginning in our homes and congregations?" So for example, the first principle becomes the inherent worth and dignity of every person in our homes and congregations. Or the third principle that we're talking about today, acceptance of one another and encouragement of spiritual growth in our homes and congregations. It's more work with the people you actually know and love than with the people out there that you don't know personally. It's more work with the people who have seen you struggle and whose little things might annoy you. I can tell you, I'm a loud typer and a loud sneezer. There's all kinds of annoying little and big things about me that would make it harder to potentially accept me than a stranger. Meg said, that's me talking, Erin, about me, but I'll tell you, Meg Barnhouse says, "Everyone who's raised children knows that peace is often at odds with liberty and that justice demands a disturbance of the peace." She's talking about the second principle there. She says to put things like liberty, justice, and peace together in a principle is outrageous and lovely. That's one of my new favorite phrases, outrageous and lovely. Unitarian Universalism, what's that? Well, it's outrageous and lovely, and then you go from there. She says, it's easier to think about working toward those things in that global context than in the context of Cheerios and pajamas, car keys, and cleaning up one's bedroom. I would especially like to testify to this morning because it's been a week since we lost my 12-year-old's house keys in the couch. We have tried very hard to find them, and no amount of prayer has made it possible yet. So, Meg says, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations beginning in our homes and congregations is a sobering ideal. She says, quote, some of the nasty
We lost your sound somehow.
Number one, it's to say congratulations on making it this far as a congregation in a pandemic. It's not easy to be together. Anyone going into the holidays with family probably knows that too. It's not easy to be together sometimes, even in the things that we make it seem like it's supposed to be great, right? The holidays with family, being part of a church, but it's not easy to do this. And so in our third principle, this acceptance and spiritual growth, the Reverend Mark Bellatini speaks to it in his piece, For Religion to be Significant. He says, for religion to be significant, it has to provide more than the comforts of community. It also has to provide opportunities for deepening, for what I call spiritual growth, and for casting down false images and stereotypes that hurt us all. A good religion has to open us up to the real diversity of the modern world. And so what that means to be more than the comforts of community, many of us have come to Unitarian Universalism being deeply hurt or traumatized in a previous religious system. And so we want comfort, we yearn for comfort, and thank God many of us find comfort when we get here. And then somewhere along the way, we have to keep going. We have to keep striving for something more, a deepening, an acceptance, and a growth. And so this is where this outrageous and lovely comes in, and where I'm going to want you to discuss when I get done talking. I want to hear from you. So acceptance and growth in the same principle, kind of like that justice and peace in the same principle, maybe not what you would have first thought. So I love it though, because I think my experience has been sometimes that when you find a way to accept who you are, what the community is like, what the world is like, is when you find a place to be able to then seek more growth, seek deepening. So I'm going to invite you, while I'm sharing some stories from my community about acceptance and growth, to be thinking, again, I asked you at the beginning, but to keep thinking and feeling, notice what's coming up for you on this topic of acceptance and growth, because I'd love to hear your stories. We're talking about the principles, but the sources of Unitarian Universalism, which are also vital, include music, art, world religions, the Judeo-Christian tradition, and the fact that we're a living tradition with personal experience as one of our sources, which means that when you share today and when I share these stories, we are sharing the scripture of our lives. Our lived experience is part of this living tradition. Okay, one more tidbit I have for you. Did you know that your church is only 3 years older than the principles themselves? The 7 principles were adopted in 1985. And I learned from Chuck and Kelly this morning that your congregation started in 1988. So I, growing up in UU as a child, I think thought the principles just came from on high. But in fact, of course, people got together in a committee. And there's a story, a link I'm going to share, a very, very long kind of oral history of how the principles happened. Real people got together to figure them out, just like real people are working on an 8th principle right now about anti-oppression, anti-racism, and multicultural community. So anyway, humans made these, and not that long ago. And that I think is also really interesting for us to remember. So for me, as a community minister, particularly one who does justice organizing around the state, I really like to lean into that living tradition piece, the piece where we share our experiences as a text for reflection and deepening. And so I asked my community about this principle, the third principle of Unitarian Universalism, and I asked them, when have you experienced acceptance or growth, and how? And so here are a few stories for you, and I hope they spark some for you too, because I'm going to open the floor after my time. So Eleanor, someone I worked with at the YMCA of Austin, shares this. She says, my biggest growth spurts always seem to come via incredibly difficult situations. In fact, she says, I think you could classify them as devastating, which has in turn given me a kind of appreciation for the world-shattering events in my life. She says, I appreciate the lessons I've learned from them, the opportunities to change and grow, though that doesn't change the fact that they were devastating. She also adds that she feels she needs to acknowledge she has a privileged life, so that she can't take credit for all the ways she came out stronger. She had resources, she had community. So that's one side. Have you experienced something devastating where you felt like you had growth, but what made it possible, right, for you to grow? And then on the flip side of that, but I think also still true, my friend Jacqueline, who shares openly about her struggles with depression, says this. She says, I've grown by experiencing more good things, more love, gaining new, meaningful relationships, romantic or platonic, and finding new ways of seeking joy. Adding suffering and struggle to pre-existing, long-standing suffering of depression has not been a recipe for growth. She says, I've needed to learn to appreciate myself by playing to my strengths, getting feedback and insight from people who love me, who can accept me and validate that what I've been through is real, that my struggle, my illness is legitimate, chronic, and bad, that I'm not a fraud. And those people make me feel accepted and powerful. And from there, I've had the chance to grow out of self-love and acceptance. So I tell you those two stories back to back for a reason. In one, we have someone feeling like they grow out of devastating circumstances, even out of suffering. And in another, we have people saying, a person saying that suffering is not what has led to growth. And I think both can be true. The way we are able to be meaning makers, the way we are able to grow out of struggle has to do with the community and the support and the love that we have to get through it. As Unitarian Universalists, our theology does not insist that someone suffer, someone be on the cross to be loved and redeemed. Our theology is that as Universalists, that's the Universalist part of our heritage, that you are loved and accepted just the way you are already. You do not have to suffer to be seen as good or loved. And so please, I want everyone to take that in, especially after a year and a half of what has been very hard for so many. I lost a family member to COVID. I lost my full-time job in ministry with the YMCA to COVID. There was a lot of grief in this time. And that's not required for you to experience growth and goodness. That's what Jacqueline's saying. And if we wrestle with these challenges together as community, we can also find some areas of growth there. Does that make sense? It's about how we do this together, not that we have to suffer to get there. But I'd be interested to hear in your own life how that has worked for you. Another one I wanted to share with you is a friend who said for her growth, she's been working on challenging the way she feels and thinks. This is my friend Rowana. She has been trying to break away from adolescent baggage, and isn't that a challenge for many of us, and to break from anxiety, which I think is a big piece of spiritual work, right? What are our spiritual resources for when we feel anxious, especially in these times? And she said one of the things she's done is she's chosen an album to listen to that she attaches as her source of peace. And that one is Fetch the Bolt Cutters by Fiona Apple. So I'd love to know in the chat if you have a favorite song, a favorite you hymn, a favorite music that helps you when you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling down, to help you find some peace. I have one more story for you from the community about acceptance, and it's, to me, the most important one and very, very close to my heart. And I share it with you with a deep sense of responsibility because it comes from my friend Xiaomin Shre from the Texas Civil Rights Project. It has to do with the impact of religion on folks who are trans, folks who are queer, and what acceptance means there and what we need to do to be an accepting community. So I share this story with Xiaomin's permission and just invite you to kind of take in what they share. So Xiaomin says, when I was in college and starting my transition, that was when I finally found the transgender community. I really grew into the person that I am during that time because it was during that transition when I was finally comfortable as myself. and how I presented. I grew from someone who couldn't speak in front of others, hid from any kind of spotlight. It makes me a little bit emotional because I know who he is now. And so to hear about even, he says, avoided any sort of situations where they're strangers, to someone who now doesn't have any problems with those areas because I'm confident in myself and who I am now. I didn't have acceptance from my blood family, but the support I received from my friends that turned into family solidified for me that love is what makes a family. Through my transition process, I've learned to be more open-minded, especially since I came from a very closed-minded upbringing. And now I'm just accepting of everyone. Now I want to pause Xiaomin's story here because I love that he shares that. This is what's so important to me, that he says he's learned to be more open-minded himself through the process of becoming and feeling accepted. Because all of us have work to do in accepting others, just as we have a need to be accepted ourselves. And so even for someone like Xiaomin, who was so lacking in acceptance in his growing up and needing acceptance, he had his own room to grow in accepting others. And so when you experience that love, that unconditional love, when we experience it as a community, may we then be able to offer it more truly, more deeply, more authentically to others. Now, in Mark Bellatini's quote about religion being significant, where he talks about the true diversity of community, I just want to bring you back to that because in the next part of this, Xiaomin talks about his cultural and religious heritage. I want to name it truthfully because that's what he shares. And I want us to remember that by all means, not everyone from these religious or cultural heritages experiences the same thing, right? This is his particular story. But he says, my parents are Christians, and that affected their ability to accept me greatly. On top of being Asians, where they're pretty close-minded to begin with. Again, his particular experience. He says, I was kicked out when I first came out as a lesbian right after high school. I didn't even know there was a trans community yet because I had been so sheltered. And there was constant emotional and mental abuse before then because they suspected I was anything but a straight, cisgender female. After I left the house, I pretty much was against religion and didn't believe in anything but actual people. He says he still doesn't have a relationship with his family because when he came out as trans and told them about his struggles with suicide and depression, they were still not able to accept him. Being seen the way they wanted to be seen by their church, they were worried that they would look like bad parents, he said. He says, I've met great people that are religious. That gives me hope. But overall, my experience has been negative, and I don't think I'll have faith anytime soon. Will you just take a breath with me as we sort of take in that very vulnerable sharing? I share this with you because as hard as we try, Unitarian Universalism still has a ways to go to be as accepting and welcoming as we want to be. And because we are needed. I still go to pride parades and wear my rainbow stole, which is over there, and hand out my cards, and I say, please come to Wildflower Church. And people still say, are you sure? Are you sure we can come? Out here in the country where I live, I passed a sign on a church marquee that says, if you don't like how you're born, try being born again. And so I ask you today, in the spirit of acceptance and growth, what is the sign that you are putting forth from Dakota UU to the world to let people know that you are a place of acceptance and growth for all? How are you letting people know? I see your beautiful faces, and I'm so glad you're here. And I know how many more people need this accepting community. So, as you think about your own experiences of spiritual growth and acceptance, I also want you to think about how you can put your own sign out there somewhere, literally or figuratively. If it's on sharing on Facebook, if it's emailing, if it's just inviting one friend that you think has been lonely or struggling lately. Take a risk. We are not about evangelizing or proselytizing historically. And the fact of the matter is, people like Xiaomin, so many people need to know that you're here and they need to be invited. And lastly, I want to say for any of you who feel a struggle in yourselves around acceptance, you are not alone. I hope that this community can be a place to surround you in love, whether it's that you're trying to accept yourself or you're struggling with a lack of acceptance from someone in your family. I just pray that this is a group of people who will see you and love you exactly as you are in the spirit of our Unitarian Universalist faith. Thank you for feeling about this, one of my favorite UU principles. And I want to open the floor for anyone who might have something they'd like to share on this topic or something that may have come up for you. I remind us all that this is a shared ministry and that each of you is a source of wisdom for this community. I think you're just welcome to unmute if you'd like to share.
Well, thank you very much. That was very powerful. Thinking back on my early history of becoming a UU, I was not inclined to want to find a church. Kelly convinced me that we should have some place for our toddler son to find a community where the morals and values we tried to teach would be supported. And so we found Dakota UU. And I was happy and content to sit and listen and often nod my head and not say much for a number of years before I started to get more involved. And that freedom and acceptance, eventually it dawned on me that with all freedom comes responsibility, and I had the responsibility, at least to myself, to figure out a little more specifically, okay, you have the freedom to believe whatever you want, figure it out. what do you believe in? And so I've been working on that ever since. And that was so powerful, not only the acceptance of the group to be vocal or not vocal, to be active or not active, but also encouraged in the spiritual growth. So I got a nice mix coming to this group. So.
I wonder if one of the problems we UUs have in drawing in more people and keeping more people, we certainly have that at Dakota UU, is that we do accept. I'm not really sure. But I don't know. That ran through my mind, so I'm putting it out there.
One of just trying to reflect based on the kind of message you're going through, and just through the George Floyd, I started to just reflect on privilege and looking how I got to where I am today. And so there, there's a lot of boxes that I've checked, that give me privilege. I won't go through that part, but I started looking at my father's early life and thinking, boy, here's a guy he only had a ninth grade education. He was poor. He was helping his siblings, but he was able to, he enlisted in the military, and out of that, found a vocation that he liked, earned money, and became successful. And it was only a couple of years ago, or within the last 2 years, really, where it's like, see, I was always thinking, well, anybody can do this. Here's somebody that was able to do that. My father was a good example. And then as I started looking at that privilege aspect of it, I later found out that, the GI Bill he got was really only for white people. He then, the town we grew up in Richfield, Minnesota, I found out that the early charters were very limiting on who could actually build a home in this location. Basically, white people, not Jewish, not black, not, they had a whole list of undesirable or people that couldn't live here. So it's like just realizing that, but he still got his head start because he was privileged with not as many boxes as I had, but white being and male being kind of that two main ones. And so ultimately I come to all this stuff, and it's really trying to figure out, education seems to be what everybody needs. Not only education on where and how you got there, the privilege that that's helped you to get there, even though you're not aware of it. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Jim. Is there anybody else who'd like to share? I'll say one of the things that has helped me to find both acceptance in loss and growth out of a hard time has been having a clear sense of what you love, of what makes you happy. What are the things that delight you, so that when you lose something that was your grounding, whether it was your job or a loved one, a marriage, a home, something, you have an orientation of what direction you can go toward joy, even when things are hard. And so for me, some of those things are music, color, community, so when I lost my physical community with the Y, and then the opportunity came up to do all of these visiting services with people, it was like not a hard decision to reorient my direction this way, because I knew that what I loved was music and community, and here we are. So, but that, again, I had the resource of being educated and an ordained minister and well connected and all of those things to find where to direct myself after those losses. But I feel like it has served me well over and over and over again to really be clear with myself about what I love, what brings me joy, what feeds my spirit. And so as we move into our closing hymn, I also invite you to give that some thought, maybe journal after the service about what are some of the things that just purely bring you love and joy in this life, and make sure you keep that list handy. Thank you for your sharing. Our closing hymn is Come and Go With Me. And I also did put a link in the chat to the history of how we got our principles. And I also would suggest a great book called Centering, which has essays and stories from ministers of color about their experiences in Unitarian Universalism. Centering, it comes from Skinner House, our denominational publisher. I say that because I chose this hymn because Reverend Derek Jackson, who was one of my professors and is now with the UU Ministers Association, talks in his chapter about from the Black church experience, loving a rousing song for the end of service. Go lift it up. And so I used to use kind of a quiet song at the end. But I think Derek is right that a rousing song is a great way to close church. So Come and Go With Me is one of my favorites for that. I'm going to sing it.
We lost your audio again, Erin. We can't hear you. Oh, we really lost you now.
Huh. Maybe. Okay, I think she's coming back. There she is.
Gotta wait.
I know, sometimes we have to wait. I celebrate how we've all been rolling with it today. All right, so I invite you to sing along with me. It's one of those songs, if you don't know it, you can catch it while I do it. And it goes like this. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. I can see you and I can feel it. Let's go. Come and go with me to that land, 'cause there'll be justice in that land. More justice. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Yeah, there'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound. They'll be dancing, won't there be? Yes. Oh, they'll be dancing in that land. They'll be dancing in that land. They'll be dancing in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. They'll be dancing in that land. They'll be dancing in that land. They'll be dancing in that land where I'm bound. Mercy. There'll be mercy in that land. There'll be mercy in that land. There'll be mercy in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Oh, there'll be mercy in that land. There'll be mercy in that land. There'll be mercy in that land where I'm bound. Keep that song in your spiritual toolkit and you can put whatever words you're needing. There'll be singing. There'll be grace. There'll be acceptance. There'll be growth. Put what you need in that song and sing it anytime. All right. Thank you for the spirit and the energy I felt from you, even on mute. For our benediction, I invite you, always just by consent, so you don't have to if you don't want to, but I invite you to put your hands out into your Hollywood squares, into your Brady Bunch, and imagine who you're holding hands with. I've got Chuck and Kelly. Who do you have in your squares? All right. Let's take a breath together. Yes. A rousing yes to the spirit of this day. Thank you for this community. Thank you for the ways that these people are living out our Unitarian Universalist values, embodied spirit of our living tradition, sharing their wisdom with each other. Yes. Again, we ask for healing and comfort. We ask for unity where there is division. We ask for justice. We ask for peace. And we give thanks for all the ways that those are present in our lives now. Go in peace, go in love. May you feel accepted and may you feel called forward into growth. Blessed be.